Everyone here knows who Senator Hawley is. He was raised in rural Lexington, Missouri, and I should note he's a Stanford graduate with highest honors, so it's a little bit of a homecoming to have him here at one of Stanford's D.C. outposts. And he also attended Yale Law and was a Supreme Court clerk for Chief Justice Roberts, as was his similarly underachieving wife, Erin Morrow Hawley. After several years as an appellate litigator, he returned to Missouri as a professor at the University of Missouri Law School and then was elected Attorney General of Missouri. And in 2018, he was elected to the United States Senate from Missouri and has really made a name for himself in this issue in his first year in the Senate. And I would say it's extraordinarly unusual for a first-term senator to come in and so immediately own an issue, as I think Senator Hawley really has done on this in his first year in the Senate. And those of us who are really concerned about the power of big tech have been looking to him for leadership. And my initial encounter with him, just really briefly, because I want to turn the thing over to him, I had written a piece in the Federalist on some of these issues that we're talking about today, and I got a call a couple days later from Jefferson City, Missouri, and I said, well, I don't know anybody from Jefferson City, so that went to voicemail. And sure enough, who was it on the other end of the line on my voicemail but Senator-elect Hawley? And he wanted to talk, and we spent about an hour on the phone kind of going over these issues, and he was obviously both very well informed for some of the things he'd already done in Missouri, but very interested in learning more. And I said, normally, Senator, I would just do a one-pager for a senator, but I know you're a former Supreme Court clerk, so you're used to drinking through the fire hose. So I'm going to go take the liberty of, I put about 60 articles from me and some of my friends, probably 200 or 300 pages of material, and I just sent it his way. And sure enough, a few weeks later in Congress, it seemed, I don't know whether this is great skimming skills from your law school days or Supreme Court days, but he'd sort of assimilated all that information and was more fluent in it than I was at that point. And so we're really delighted to have him here with us today. He's been a real trailblazer in fighting for the free and open internet, and we're looking forward to hearing his remarks and seeing his continued leadership here on these issues in the U.S. Senate. Please join me in giving me a warm welcome to Senator Josh Hawley.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeremy. It's great to be here. It's always good to be back, at least in spirit, at Stanford and here at the Hoover Institution. Hoover was really a lifeline for me when I was a Stanford undergraduate. I loved my time there. It's great to have Stanford over my shoulder, at least digitally. And it's not, I took it as a compliment when Jeremy actually sent me real reading and didn't just give me the Senate one-pager. I noticed since that I've become a United States Senator, once upon a time I was a practicing lawyer. I was a constitutional lawyer. I was a law professor for a while, and I used to get invited places to give real substantive speeches and to talk about real things like I hope we're going to do today. But I've noticed since that I've running for office and being in office, now I get asked to talk about, these, I'm not trusted with weighty subjects any longer. I mean, now it's sort of, would you come and talk about the life of a public official, as opposed to anything substantive. So it's a real delight to be here today. I'll tell you a funny story about I'm not only a freshman senator, I am the youngest senator of either party. Before I stepped up to the podium here, I took off my Senate pin, which is a little piece of jewelry that I frankly detest. And when I first got it, I said, I'm never going to wear this. And so I handed it to my staff, and they said, we really think you'll want this, Senator. And I said, I don't want it. I think it's pretentious. I think it looks silly. I don't wear pin. I'm not doing that. So then I went to vote. My first vote, I walk up to the chamber, and the security guards who stand there doing their job put out their hands, stop me. And they said, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going on the floor to vote. They said, where's your pass? And I said, well, I don't think I need a pass. I'm not staff. And they said, who are you? And I said, well, I'm the senator. And they said, where's your pin? I said, I am. I'm the United States Senator from Missouri. I had to go dig out the pin. I was subsequently stopped on the subway that runs back and forth. I've been stopped multiple times, so I finally relented. I'm wearing the pin when I'm in the United States Senate, but not with you here today. So it's great to be here and among friends, and I want to thank the Hoover Institution again for inviting me to speak on this important subject. I want to focus your attention on the brief time that we have together on the issue of social media in particular. Social media is challenging for us to grapple with because it presents so many novel problems, as you well know, and none of them seem to admit of easy answers. In many ways, the internal tensions of our goals seem irreconcilable. I mean, how do we preserve online data privacy for users of products whose very purpose is hyper-personalized service? Or how is it possible for big tech platforms to keep the digital public square pruned, if you like, and free of criminal activity or other vices without inserting their own political or content biases into the editorializing that they're doing. What does competition even look like in this space? I mean, that's a really, really tough question. What does competition look like? I mean, after all, the supposed value of this space to consumers is a kind of integration. It's an integration of various services and various platforms, various lines of business, all in one place. And these, of course, are very important questions. They are much the questions of the day on Capitol Hill. I have my views on each of them, and they are rightly the subject of a quite serious debate, and I hope that debate will continue and extend. But I want to suggest to you today that, in a sense, all of those questions are downstream of a larger one, a bigger question, which I think we ought to be devoting more time to as a society, and I want to talk with you about briefly this afternoon. And that is the question of the worth of these social media platforms and the social media business model to begin with. What is its actual worth to the American economy and to American society? I mean, one of the most difficult things about acting in this area is the fear that any significant change in this space, any significant adjustment to the rules of the road, whether it be privacy requirements or content requirements, might end up stifling Silicon Valley, which we are accustomed to regarding, certainly we're told, as the great crown jewel of the American economy. But is it? Is it? It's heresy to say that here with Stanford University over my shoulder, but is Silicon Valley, the platforms, the products, the business models that it has been giving us of late, is this really the best that our best minds have to offer? And I won't hide my thesis from you. My thesis is I think the evidence is more and more strongly suggesting that there is something that is deeply troubling, maybe even deeply wrong, with the entire social media economy. That it does not represent a source of strength for America's tomorrow, but is rather a source of peril. Consider for a moment the basic business model of the dominant social media platforms. You're familiar with them. You might think of it as akin to financial arbitrage. Maybe we'll call it attention arbitrage. Users' attention is bought by the tech giants and then immediately sold to advertisers for the highest price, of course. Now, arbitrage opportunities, as those of you familiar with markets know, are supposed to close, right? I mean, the market eventually determines that something is off. How is it that this attention arbitrage in the social media market is preserved and renewed over and over again? And that's where things get really, really scary, because it's preserved by hijacking users' neural circuitry to prevent rational decision-making about what to click and how to spend time. Or just to simplify that a little bit, it's preserved through addiction. Social media only works, as a business model anyway, if it consumes users' time and attention day after day after day. It needs to replace the various activities we did perfectly well without social media for the entire known history of the human race with itself. It needs to replace those activities with time spent on social media, so that addiction is actually the point. That's what social media shareholders are investing in. They are investing in the addiction of users. And I think that social media users actually understand this intuitively, even if they would put it a bit differently. You don't log on to Facebook to connect with a friend when you can just as easily call him or shoot her a text with your phone. You don't log on to find an article that you've been meaning to read when you could just as easily go and find that specific article yourself using a service or a platform that's designed to do that. Now, you log on to Facebook to be on Facebook. The attention arbitrage market itself becomes the destination. And we all know the effects. Our attention spans have dulled. Our tempers have quickened. We reduce our friends to their public presentation in short posts. We substitute comments and likes for phone calls and direct human interaction. And those are the benign effects. Day after day, it seems, brings fresh data, fresh reports, fresh studies, detailing the significant social consequences of social media use in such large quantities. Today's Washington Post, for instance, I don't know if you've seen it, has a chilling story about the rash of teenage suicide, especially in younger teenagers. Reporters walk through the evidence here. They trace the researchers' attempt to isolate what is driving this surge in teen suicide. They tried various theories mapped onto various events in society, and eventually what they discovered was the uptick. It's not just an uptick, it's a surge in teenage suicide, particularly among younger teenagers, coincides eerily with the introduction of the iPhone, particularly in its later models, which made where the social media platforms and the social media apps were readily available and optimized for use. Now, it could just be correlation, not causation, but as I say, day after day brings new studies that strongly suggest that there is a significant correlation, if not a causal relationship, between growing social media presence, between the avalanche of social media usage, and these terrible social consequences. Depression is another example. We're struggling society-wide with an epidemic of teenage depression and rising depression rates among young adults and older Americans, for that matter, too. And again, many studies now suggest that the time spent on social media and on social media platforms at least correlates to some degree with increased depression, loneliness. All of these social consequences, these are significant. You might even say that they are severe. And the question we need to be asking is, what is the role of social media in driving them, in encouraging them, in promoting them? And is this really something that is good for our society in the long term, or for our economy for that matter? While we're talking about the economy, think for a second about the opportunity cost that this social media business model and these social media platforms, which you might call the social media economy, think what it presents. This is what some of our brightest minds have been doing with their time for years now. Designing these platforms, designing apps that integrate with them. I mean, what else might they have been doing? Just think about it. What else might these bright minds, these talented women and men have been doing that might have been truly productive for the American economy and for American consumers? We've encouraged an entire generation of our bright engineers in a discipline that provides little or no productive value to the United States economy, sucking them from communities that need their talents out to outposts on the coast, encouraging them to forget the problems of the people that they left behind. And of course, capital then follows them to those places. These are economic developments that reward some, there's no doubt about that, but attention arbitrage, like financial arbitrage, is no foundation for long-term growth. And that's my thesis to you today. You know, the most frightening thought of all of this is that the social media platforms might come to define our future economy. A social media economy. Imagine that. An economy that does not value the things that matter produces a society that is shaped in its own image. That, I want to suggest to you, is something that we cannot afford. It is something that we cannot allow. And it is within our power to change it. And that is the great challenge and task of our time. So to conclude, I want to say thank you again to Hoover for having me and for hosting this very important conversation. And I think it is incumbent upon all of us, as we consider the place that we're in now, as we consider the new era that we're living in, particularly those of us who believe in free markets, who believe in the free and open economy, to be asking ourselves, what kind of an economy are we encouraging? What kind of a society is that producing? And what is our responsibility, all of us, as members of that society, to shape it in the best way for the future? Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be with you. And Jeremy, I'd be happy to take a few questions if that's all right with you. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hi, Max Fillion. I work with MLEX. I'm actually a Missouri grad too.
Oh, great.
So, so you've laid out a couple of really great examples of the issues that social media presents for us, and I'm wondering, like, in tackling these issues, what's the best way to be thinking about it? I mean, you have people saying we need to approach this from a consumer privacy consumer protection issue, or using the antitrust laws, or you could use the antitrust laws to talk about splitting up companies or whatever else. I mean, are you approaching it and there's new legislation obviously on the floor, so what's the best way to think about really tackling all these issues that you've presented today?
Well, I don't think that there's any one right approach, and the scope of the policy areas that you've just mentioned in your question, I think, suggests just how big a problem this is, and just how pervasive and influence social media is. Certainly, there are antitrust questions. I mean, look, as Attorney General of Missouri, which is what I did before I was elected to the Senate, I launched the country's first investigation at the state level of Google. And it was multifaceted. I mean, we looked at, Missouri has quite robust antitrust laws, actually. So we looked at, the investigation was predicated on potential violations of antitrust, on potential associated anti-competitive behavior, on consumer welfare and consumer protection issues, and also privacy. You know, those are related but different concerns. And so Google alone, let alone these other social media platforms, touches all of those. So I think I think there's no one correct way to proceed. I think we need to look across the waterfront. I think we should not be hasty in what we do. I think that we should not barrel forth we need to have a robust discussion. But I, for one, think that one place where we ought to be able to begin immediately is on privacy considerations as it relates to children. And I've introduced legislation. It's bipartisan legislation. It's the first major piece of child privacy online legislation in over 20 years, and it would prevent online tracking of children. It would prevent advertisements directed towards children, and it would give parents, on behalf of their minor children up to age 15, a right to have their data deleted. It's the so-called eraser button, is what we like to call it. I think this is a great place to begin, and I hope that it will indeed pass this Congress this year and be enacted into law. And I think we ought to be looking at things like that. I want to say, as a